Destroying Israel is at the core of the regime's ideology. It has committed and supported many acts of violence and terrorism against both countries. Now the United States is undertaking a diplomatic and financial pressure campaign to cut off the funds that the regime uses to enrich itself and support death and destruction. The BBG is launching a new 24/7 Farsi language TV channel. It will span not only television, but radio, digital, and social media format, so that the ordinary Iranians inside of Iran and around the globe can know that America stands with them.
The situation between the United States and Iran remains extremely tense, and as we see now happening, the U.S. has set its sights on U.S. media in terms of how to deal with this. We've heard the announcement from the U.S. Secretary of State that they're launching a 24/7 Farsi channel. Now, it will be under the banner of the BBG, which stands for the Broadcasting Board of Governors. This comprises different radio and TV outlets, and back in 2016, it received a budget of some $750 million. Now what we're hearing is that this new Farsi channel will also be available on digital and on social media. Now, we heard the U.S. Secretary of State say that for 40 years, the Iranian people had been subjected to hearing from their leaders about what a great Satan the United States was, and that now finally they wouldn't have to subject themselves to fake news. But prior to saying this, Pompeo also said that the United States was undertaking tough measures against Iran. Of course, these comments have prompted an immediate angry reaction from Tehran.
Do not play with the lion's tail, or else you will regret it.
Now, Pompeo also said that the United States was not afraid to challenge Iran with sanctions at the highest level, and he called on other countries to also jointly combine in these economic sanctions. He also went on to say that the United States was undertaking a diplomatic and financial pressure campaign against Tehran, that they were planning on cutting off funds so that, to quote, the regime would no longer be able to involve itself in death and destruction. He also said that they were putting maximum pressure on the regime's ability to regenerate and move money. Now, of course, we're waiting to hear what other measures the United States is planning on putting in place. We know, for example, that the next round of sanctions goes into effect on the 4th of August. So certainly relations between the two countries increasingly getting tense.
A hard-won nuclear deal was struck between global powers and Iran back in 2015. In it, Iran agreed to some limitations to its nuclear program in exchange for sanctions being lifted. But the US unilaterally withdrew from the agreement in May. Other signatories are determined that the agreement stays in place. Let's bring in political communications expert Fouad Izzadi now. Mr. Izzadi, thank you for joining us on the program. Now, Trump and Rouhani have exchanged threats. Where do we go from here?
I think it's up to the United States. As you just reported, the U.S. got out of the nuclear agreement without any reason. The International Atomic Energy Agency has certified 11 times already that Iran has been complying with the nuclear agreement. And what you heard from Secretary Pompeo a few hours ago was a regime change program, and they are putting a lot of pressure on Iran financially. They are engaging in a psychological warfare against the Iranian people, and they are basically saying that they haven't learned anything in the last 70 years because they had another coup d'etat here in Tehran in 1953. So they are basically employing the same old policies of regime change and coup d'etat and interfering in other countries' internal affairs. It is very ironic that in the last couple of weeks, the U.S. government and U.S. media has been accusing Russia and RT in terms of interfering in U.S. internal affairs. And you see what the U.S. government is doing to other people, which is much worse than anybody can imagine. So the result is that the U.S. is engaging in activities that at the end of the day may lead into a military confrontation, and I hope we don't reach that stage.
We've been waiting on an official reaction from Iran to the TV channel launch. We've just heard from them. They say Pompeo's speech is an intrusion of the U.S. into Iran's inner policy. What do you make of that?
That's what they are doing. They are trying to basically accuse the Iranian government of things that the U.S. engages in these activities much more than anybody else in the world. It was interesting during his speech in California, there was a lady that was sort of protesting, shouting against the U.S. policy with regard to immigrants, separating children and babies from their mother. And they kicked the lady out of the news conference, the room that Pompeo was speaking. The title of his speech was Listening to the Iranian People, but we saw how the U.S. government deals with its own people, not tolerating any type of dissent when it comes to the harsh policies, racist policies that they have. Pompeo talked about supporting Iranian people, but just a few weeks ago, the U.S. Supreme Court approved Trump's anti-Muslim visa ban. And so there are a lot of Iranians, grandmothers, grandfathers that want to go and visit their grandchildren in the U.S. and they cannot get a visa because of Pompeo and Trump. So the level of hypocrisy in what we saw this morning from Secretary Pompeo was quite extensive.
President Rouhani hasn't shied away from standing up to Trump. He's previously said, warned Trump that there would be the mother of all wars. Do you think this is the kind of rhetoric that sits well with the public in Iran?
When Rouhani came into power about 5 years ago, his main foreign policy objective was to reduce tensions with the United States. That's why he basically went for the nuclear agreement. And what he got in return was unfulfilled promises and then the exit of the United States. So Rouhani is quite angry because he has put a lot of his own prestige online to improve relations with the West and the United States, and he got nothing out of it. So Rouhani is angry, and the people of Iran, when they're seeing economic difficulties that are stemming from sanctions, they're not blaming him because they realize that he has tried his best to resolve some of these problems. They're blaming Mr. Trump for the difficulties that Iran is facing because of sanctions. And I think if the U.S. government does not change course, Rouhani's rhetoric against U.S. will continue to increase.
Political communications expert Fawad Izadi. Thank you. Secretive reporters Redfish claim that not all German arms are sold legally. Here's a part of that report. You can watch it in full on YouTube.
In Oberndorf Menschen, die richtig Angst haben, sich dazu zu äußern.
Warum?
Also Heckler & Koch hat halt auch längere Arme.
Germany gets a lot of praise for its reasonable approach to politics, but the German government has a dirty secret. While Germany prides itself on having some of the toughest arms export laws on the planet, it's actually the fourth biggest arms exporter in the world. Lawyer Holger Rothbauer has taken one of the country's major arms manufacturers and one of the world's biggest small arms producers, the infamous Heckler & Koch, to court. They stand accused of illegally shipping weapons to conflict zones.
The Heckler & Koch trial indeed is, and I'm not using that word too often, it's historic. It's really historic because it shows I would call it blasphemy, this cheating of etiquettes of the German government to the German people.
The illegal arms shipments they're accused of include 16 batches of G36 assault rifles, some of which ended up being used in a tragedy which shook the world. In 2014, 43 students became collateral in Mexico's bloody war on drugs when they were kidnapped by corrupt police who handed them over to the notorious Guerreros Unidos drug cartel. At least several of the students were killed by the Heckler & Koch rifles. The company is incredibly hostile to media interest and public attention. It didn't take long for the police to arrive to stop us from filming, and the town's residents weren't particularly enthusiastic to speak to us either. We approached Heckler & Koch multiple times to discuss the allegations cited in this report. Unfortunately, despite all our efforts, Heckler & Koch weren't very happy to see us.
Wow.
You don't want to say something? Verstehen Sie mich?
To get an export license, German arms manufacturers have to go through several government ministries who will check that the shipment destination isn't subject to any sort of ban by German law. If it is, and the arms company's application fails, then they have another option. They can appeal to the Federal Security Council. And here's where things get interesting. This council is made up of a handful of senior ministers who sit down with the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, in a secretive meeting where they review the application and decide whether to approve it or not. The details of this meeting are never made public. There is no media presence or independent scrutiny.
We'll be back with more news after this short